All right, hi everybody. I'm Jennifer Sauer. I am Scholar Services and Electronic Resources Librarian here at Forsyth Library. Welcome to Forsyth. We are going to call this now the hub of knowledge generation. Today we have the second in a series of workshops to help you learn more about presenting your research at professional meetings, conferences, and we're really focused right now on SACAD, which is upcoming. That's the John Heinrichs Scholarly and Creative Activities Day, April 26th in the Union. Today our subject is create a winning poster, talking about aesthetics, standards, fonts, best practices, those types of things. And to provide you a wealth of knowledge, we have Associate Professor Dr. Hendratta Ali from the Department of Geosciences. None of you know her, I know. And we also have Assistant Professor Dr. Trey Hill from the Department of Psychology. So I'm going to let them take it away. A couple of housekeeping things though. Gave you some little swag, chip clips this time. You want to keep everything organized when you're doing research, right? You can organize your chips with that. And we have a survey at the end of the session, and we'd appreciate it if you take that. We'll hand it out a little bit later. And if you didn't swipe in with Tiger Card at the end of the session, if you please just go back to where the camera is. And if you don't have your Tiger ID, that's fine. We can look you up, put you in there. So I will let Dr. Ali begin. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Can everybody hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
So I imagine if you are here, you're probably thinking of presenting a poster or planning on presenting a poster. How many people are presenting a poster coming up shortly? That's awesome. That's what I wanted. So we're here to do a workshop about creating a winning poster. And I kind of toyed a lot with this idea, what my presentation was going to be about, think about it, how to organize it, what I would say to you or how I would interact with you. But it's a workshop, so I figured you gotta do some work. So what I'm going to try to get you to do today is to start on the poster, okay? We're actually going to try to get started on the poster if you've not started. I do not have a long presentation, so I took a gamble here, and you're going to tell me if it works or not. So I have only one slide. My presentation today is only one slide, right? So I decided I was going to try to create a poster about creating a poster. Can everybody read what is on there? No. So it summarizes the information that I gathered about how you can create a poster. Because of a little bit of logistics, I was hoping that would actually print it out so you can see how it looks like. But, so here is what I have going for you. And my first tip, the title of the presentations are Tips and Tricks, so I'm going to give you some tips. My first tip is, if you're going to create a poster, no matter how large or how wide the dimensions are, when I create my poster, the first thing I do is I always print it on a sheet of paper like this. So I'm going to pass this out. If you can read what is on this paper, your poster is probably going to be, the font is probably going to be large enough for you to be able to read. Okay? So that is, I always try to print a format on a sheet of paper. If I can read it, then I feel confident that other people will be able to read my poster. So that is the first thing. So if you want to pass this out, everybody gets a copy. Then we can talk about. So several people have black and white copies. Now, who doesn't have a poster yet? Okay, these people are going to get colored, and then you're going to tell me which one you prefer. I'm trying to make a point. The second thing about posters, the second tip is you should have color on it, right? So if there's color on it, then it's much more appealing. Oh, you heard me. There's going to be extra copies. Okay. So I'm going to pass out some extra copies to those who don't. So now for those who have grayscale, have a look at the colored version and see if you prefer. This is a color for your table. Right? Color. This is the color. Do you have color over there? All right. So obviously, if you look at both the gray scale and the color scale, you can tell that the color scale is much more attractive, right? So that is the second tip. You want to have some color on your poster. However, you don't want to have too much color because the focus of your poster is the information you're communicating, not the diagrams or the background. So you should strike a balance between the color that you use and the information that you're trying to present. So when I was working on this, I tried to organize a poster how you typically organize any other poster. The only difference here is I did not do any quantitative research, so I didn't have original data. So I'm just reporting. So my poster is slightly different from what maybe a standard empirical poster might be like. However, it still has all the elements. So I have a summary that says what the poster is and what you need to make a great poster. So very short sentences to summarize the core of the idea. Your poster has to be simple. It should be self-explanatory, so if somebody looks at it, they should be able to understand what it's talking about without you having to talk at them. It's good to reinforce what they know, but you don't have to. Third thing is, it should be visually appealing. So for those who had the color, they felt much, much happier than if they had grayscale, right? And then it should communicate clear ideas. You don't want to put too much ideas or too much information on your poster because it can be confusing. So you want to make it focused and simple. If somebody wants more, they would come and look for you. That is the whole point of the poster. The second part of your poster is the introduction. So the introduction synthesizes or summarizes the information that you want to tell people. Usually it's something that you already know about the topic that you're talking about. So, for example, I know that posters are displays that we create to share information that we've synthesized. We take a lot of information, we digest it into a very small, digestible quantity, and then we share it on a visual display. So, summarized information, visual display. That's really what the poster is all about. And so to prepare the poster, you have to think of a few things. Who is going to be looking at the poster? Usually if you're on a campus, it's going to be academics. If you're doing a poster for grade school, it's going to be kids, right? You have to be mindful of who is going to look at your poster. So your audience matters. You also have to think of how posters communicate information. Posters communicate information visually, so the visuals are very important. You have to think of what people will be looking at. Third thing, you want to know the guidelines or the expectations of the conference, the meeting, or the situation where you're presenting. Each situation is different. So if I'm presenting at a national meeting, it's different from if I'm presenting on campus. All systems have their own guidelines. SACAT does. So you want to look at those guidelines so that you focus your presentation on what it is that they're talking about. So the objectives of a poster then would be to compile and organize information or data and to create and present the poster, right? That's pretty much it. Want to organize information, create a poster. That's the objective. And that's the same objective I have here. So what do you have to do? The methods that you have to use then is first, you have to organize your ideas. You can't be all over the place, right? So you have to focus. Second thing, you have to conduct a research, investigation. You have to gather information somehow, data. Once you have that, you have to compile it and put it into a meaningful structure. And then design your poster with the software or with the markers. However you want to design the poster, you have to organize it so that it makes sense when people look at it. So, I organized my poster. I designed it with PowerPoint. That is the simplest tool you can use. I encourage you to use it. Otherwise, you can use Adobe Illustrator. There are other sophisticated software out there that you can use for poster design. So what are the findings? My findings about poster, or your findings about your research, is a product that you get after you conduct an investigation or some kind of a research. And what I found out about posters is that there are 3 big parts to it. There is the layout, so how it looks. There is the different sections, the components of the poster. So I have that here in the middle. And then there is display. So how you show the information that is within the poster. And usually your layout has a title. So I have a title, Creating a Winning Poster, Design and Content. Then you have the authors, the affiliations. If they have logos, you want to put that information so that it can stand out. The second thing is how you organize a poster. We are typically in the West, people read from left to right, from top to bottom. So I just use that simple principle. I don't want to make it too complicated and have something here and something over there that people cannot figure out. So logically, we just do left to right, top to bottom. So that's how I organize my poster. Start from there to the middle, simple. Third part is the body and the structure. So you want to keep in mind the main elements of project presentation. Always have an abstract or a summary, introduction, objectives, methods, and so forth. You want to maintain that sequence. Sometimes, depending on what you're presenting, here I have a summary, not an abstract, because abstract relates to more technical talks or technical presentations. So I have a summary instead, but it could have been an abstract. Then we have the display section. So what I really wanted you to look at from the copies that I handed out, if you look at the display in the middle, it's actually made on purpose. You can read the title. So I used a large enough font that even on this little display, you could read the title. Then I began to change the font, the background, lots of color, and it's just confusing, right? There's tons of color in that middle panel. It makes it very confusing. The font size changes all the time. Some things you can read, others you can't read. So be consistent. Don't use too much font or too many different types. It distracts. That's the second thing. Third part of a poster, display elements. So your illustrations, you want to make them large and simple. I could have made this very complicated, but I decided it would be too much information. So I want something that you can read in less than a minute. That should be good. Second thing, your captions, if there are any captions, they should be brief and simplified. So I have captions there, so I could go and write stories about them. And like, posters matter. Makes sense. It's also brief, right? The third thing, your background. I am not a proponent of too much background. I like one color background. If you want to use graphics, minimize it because you don't want to distract. So like the middle panel in there, I had graphics. There is text, there is an image. You can barely see any of it because the graphics is overwhelming. So you want to minimize background graphics if you can. Then color and space. You want to use 2 to 4 colors. Don't go too much on the coloring. It really, now if you are dealing with kids in kindergarten, maybe that would be an exception. But for the most part, you want to keep it simple. You can't go wrong with simple. You might tumble if you do complex. And then the font size, you want to do font size that's easy to read. So Arial, Times New Roman are the standard that I would recommend. Usually, most of this is in Arial. You can use Times New Roman as well. Other funky type of fonts, they are a little bit more difficult to read when you print them out on paper. So I would stay away from those. So that is about the poster design. Now the poster content, which is what you are trying to communicate to people is more about the research and or the investigation that you did. And what I have here is pretty much Bloom's domains are my go-to. So what I want us to do today is to use this basic concept where you try to look at what category of information your poster is trying to organize to come up with some kind of a hypothesis or an objective and the methods that you're going to use. So the first thing, we go from the lower domain all the way to the high domains, right? And instead of talking at you, what I want us to do briefly is to try to get something done right here, right now. So I'm going to pass this. This is a template, and with your names and everything else, I might, if you're interested in having a physical copy, I can email it to you. But the design of a poster is up to you. Feel free to design your poster any way you want to use boxes, you want to use circles. That's up to you. All right, so this is a blank template that doesn't have any details yet on it. And since all of you are thinking or planning on presenting a poster, I'm assuming that you all have some kind of a topic, right? You all have some kind of an idea. So the first thing I want you to do, you can go on the whiteboard, or you can just write it on there, is write a title for what you think you want to do of your presentation. Write anything that communicates what your project is about. So, my second slide that I have for you now is this one. So you want to use verbs because they show action, they show that you're doing something or that you did something. So once you've written your title, the second thing I want us to do is to write objectives. All of you have a project, so you probably have an objective. And what I want us to do is, we have several different categories. If you're a beginner, usually you just want to identify something, reproduce something, duplicate, or collect. So if I wanted to study the birds that are on campus, maybe my objective would be to identify the different species of birds on campus. That is a short, simple objective. So you want to use those type of words to describe what it is that you're doing. So you might be gathering information about something so that you can organize it. So your objective would be to classify the different categories of books that are found in the library. That is an objective. You tell somebody what you're going to do. So let's take a few minutes, maybe 2-3 minutes, and try to use any of the verbs that you see on there to kind of organize a brief objective. And I'm going to pick on 1 or 2 people to actually tell us what their objectives are. So just from the few interactions I've had, another tip. Usually 2 to 3 objectives are really good. You start from a simple one and then you work your way up. So the first thing is maybe to collect, I want to collect books about Harry Potter. Then my second objective would be actually read those books. And then the third objective might be to organize a play around those books. Does that make sense? I've never read the Harry Potter book per day. I might start. So if you have questions, just let me know. Let's write those objectives, people. That's something that you have going for your poster already. So to wrap this up, I'll give you one more tip. Once you have your objectives written, the next thing that you can easily do now is write your methods. Because you know what you would do, knowing how to do it becomes a little bit easier. How do you collect data from people? You're going to conduct an interview, right? Or you might have them fill a survey. So that would be a method. If you're analyzing samples, then you're going to use some kind of equipment. That would be a method. If it is a poster, you don't have to go into the details. You just have to state those methods. So again, maybe I would say your methods should not be more than 25 words long. If you're doing a poster, you should be able to summarize it into 3 short sentences. So if you think about it that way, then it makes your poster really easy. It is not too wordy. Because how many of you read everything that I had on that poster? Show of hands. Right? Very few people. That is how posters work, even though it was very, very succinct. So most of the times, people don't spend too much time reading. So think about it that way. All right? So those are my tips. Dr. Hill would kind of give you the more general information about how to specifics. And then if we still have more time, we can actually get those methods and maybe some part of your introduction started. Okay?
Before we really start, I want to go over a few things first. A poster is not a paper. So sometimes I think students get confused and they take big chunks of a paper and will just copy and paste it into a poster, which ultimately ends up in just a ton of text. And then it's kind of text heavy, and from 6 inches away, a person might still not be able to read it, which is not what you want. Now, if you want to put a lot of information, you can always take emails from people who are passing by your poster. You can take emails, give them cards, you can put stuff up on a website, send them the actual paper if that's what you want to do. But again, don't confuse your poster with the paper. The poster has a very different purpose. So when possible, condense your research into coherent, concise, maybe a few ideas, not just every single thing you're trying to tell people. This is not the sum total of all of your research or all of your scholarship. It's like a few pieces of information you might find the most important. So a couple big ideas, and stick to those. Another thing that I try to tell my students to do is to create a story. Science sometimes gets its reputation for being really dry and bland, and that doesn't have to be the case. The best science writing, I think, is essentially storytelling. So create characters. Your hypotheses, a theory, might be a character, and it's kind of going to battle with the data, and you're going to find something. You're trying to create conflict. People remember stories. They sort of stick. As a psychologist, I know kind of how people remember things. And stories have a very special place in human cognition. We're going to remember them much better than just dry facts. So come up with a story. Stories resonate. They stick. At the point of doing any kind of research or presenting your research is to disseminate your ideas, to let people know what you've done, to become rich and famous and all that cool stuff. Then you want people to remember it. So come up with as many cool ways as you can to get people to remember what you're doing. Okay, so on to non-empirical. Anybody know what non-empirical means?
Came last week. Dr. Cruz went over that.
So basically, it's these types of things. Literature reviews, proposed studies as opposed to actual studies, theory development. The common theme here is that they lack data. You're not observing things, you're not taking note of observations, you're not collecting data or analyzing it. That doesn't mean it's some kind of less thing. It's equally as important. It's just a different type of research. So literature review, you might be looking out into the wide world of science or whatever field you're in and figuring out what is known, and then condensing that down into what we actually know and what we don't know, and then hopefully pointing the compass in the direction where we can figure out what would be the logical next step of the research. So that's basically what non-empirical is, and I'm going to show you a few examples and then how to actually start creating a poster. Dr. Ali gave you some really good advice on this stuff, but I think a lot of times students have questions about how to actually get here, so literally how to open up PowerPoint and create that. So I'm going to show you kind of quickly how to do that here in a moment. Now, some departures from traditional empirical papers. Again, you're not going to have any data. You might have a less defined method. If it's a proposal, you might still have a method, but it might not be as defined. You might have some rough ideas about what you're wanting to do, but they might not be as developed as you normally would. You're not going to have any results, but you may have predicted results. If my students are putting together proposals, then I want them to think that far ahead. If I get actual data, how am I going to analyze it? What might I expect to happen? and actually create figures. This is what should happen if I'm correct. Okay, to think that far out in advance. You're going to have a larger literature review section. You know, if you have an empirical poster, you might have a smaller section because you're devoting more space to figures, to data analysis, to interpretation. You're not going to have that for a non-empirical poster, so you might have more time actually developing your ideas. And you're probably going to have a larger section on future research or just future scholarship. I don't want to make this thing too science heavy, but you know, what's the next step? You're probably going to be thinking more about that in a non-empirical poster than in an empirical poster. Okay, now in terms of actually creating it, some components you might have, but again, you're not going to have all of these. Ones you definitely want to have, though, are your title, your name. Most of them are going to have an abstract or a synopsis, background, something like that. Background including literature review, a pro section or a con section, if it's that kind of a thing. For example, one of the classes that I teach occasionally will have some controversial topic in psychology. You have a pro section and a con section, and you essentially look for research supporting or not supporting those two ideas, and you might come up with a literature review and a poster for that. You might have a research question, a research idea, an objective, something like that. Examples of what you found. So if you found a lot of papers in a specific area, you might have sections devoted to those specific things. Proposed methods, predicted results, and your conclusions. So those are just some examples of sections you might have. And again, you don't have to have all of them. It's largely going to depend on what your specific area of research is. But one thing you absolutely don't want to forget to do is make it visually appealing. So I always tell my students to include figures or pictures. Make sure that they're tied in directly to what you're studying, but you don't want to make it so boring that nobody's going to look at it. You kind of have to be a salesperson in a sense. If you are, and I know that sounds kind of icky because you're supposed to be this researcher and you're serious and all that stuff, but you're also competing for attention with tons and tons of other posters. Now you can give out money to get people to your poster.
Scott does, yay!
That's always a good idea, but if you don't have money, then you kind of have to sell your poster a little bit. Make it look nice, but not unprofessional. That's kind of a difficult balance to strike sometimes. So I have a few examples here. I asked for permission for these. So the first one is one of kind of a rock star student in my lab. She's a freshman, Riley Staub, up here, and this is a poster that we're putting together. It's still kind of in the beta stages, so it's not perfect yet, but this is a proposal for some memory research she's doing, looking at the effect of leading questions on memory for crimes and things like that. And so you can see she's got the introduction, the hypothesis, a proposed method, predicted results, all the standard things that you might find in an empirical paper, but we don't actually have data yet. But it's like a plan. So the idea here with this poster for her is she's got all this stuff, and now I can actually get the IRB completed, go out and do the study, and we're kind of ready to hit the ground running. But she's thought about all this stuff, and it's kind of nice and organized. She's got a few pictures. It's not showing up on there, but she's got a few pictures, and the text is large enough. There's some color, neat things like that. Of course, my lab logo for shameless self-promotion. Okay. Here is a different one, and I apologize you can't see the text. All of this stuff is available. I'll put a link up so you can find it. I think maybe Andy's going to put it up too. So you'll be able to see this a little better. The formatting for this poster is a little different, so it's not the wide screen that it's placed onto here. But you can see that you have different columns, definitions for certain concepts. This one is on kin selection and homosexuality, this evolutionary psychology stuff. So they have these different sections where they looked up papers in these different areas of research and kind of synthesized it, combined it, made some suggestions for future research. Again, this is the idea. You're finding out what is known and pointing the compass in a direction where we can kind of explore and add incrementally to what we know, to the knowledge base. Okay, so those are some examples. Now, as far as things to do with empirical or non-empirical papers, you want to definitely make the text readable. If I can't read it, then I'm not going to stand in front of it. If I'm just competing, with a bunch of other posters, I might walk right by and look at somebody else's stuff. You want to include graphics. People are attracted to images, to figures. They kind of gravitate toward it, like flies or moths to a candle or something. I'm sure everybody's heard the saying, "A picture's worth 1,000 words." You typically don't have that many words that you can actually put on a poster where it can still be readable. So your space is limited in a very real sense, and you want to make sure that you get all your information out there, and a picture sometimes can do that pretty well. Now the picture should complement the text of the poster. If my poster is about psychology, I don't necessarily want a volcano or something on my poster unless it's some kind of joke. What?
Don't pick on volcanoes.
I love volcanoes, but I don't really think that has anything to do necessarily with my poster. It might be false advertisement if we go back to the whole salesperson thing. So don't just put random stuff up there. Make sure it's at least a little bit related to what your poster is about. Okay, any questions so far? All right. So these are some things to do. Now, things to avoid is putting too much text on a poster. If there's too much text, it's a little daunting to read. And most people are going to find it a little socially awkward to stand in front of a poster, especially if you're right there, and spend like 5 minutes just reading the text of your poster. One thing that I try to encourage my students to do is bullet points. Bullet points encourage you to be condensed with your text to get to the point. You don't have to write full sentences. That is completely unnecessary in my opinion. You're just trying to convey information, and you don't have to do it in full sentence form. Inappropriate font style or size. There are some really fun fonts, and I would just say save those for other things. For my students, things like Arial, Times New Roman, something similar to those would probably be appropriate. You can get a little more creative if you're talking about the font style for your title, but don't go too out of this world. You want to make sure that it's readable but professional, again, aesthetically appealing, but not too unprofessional. So another thing that I tend not to like, although I see it a lot, is a busy background. And all I mean by that is overlaying images. Sometimes people might have like a giant human brain in the background, and then it's kind of transparent, and then you might have text on top of it. It makes it difficult to read. It looks kind of cool if the point is not to read it. If it's just to look at, then that's fine. But if I'm trying to read it, it's kind of difficult. I usually encourage students to go with a light colored background. It doesn't have to be white. It can be something else as long as it's light colored and a darker font. You can do the opposite. It just might get expensive in terms of printing. If everything's like a darker color, you've got to print that, and then the negative space would be white. So again, the poster should be professional but aesthetically pleasing. And font readable. I put that on there a few times because it's really, really important. Okay? Or because I just forgot and put it on. Now, other things to know. You definitely want to know your audience. I think Hendratta mentioned this as well. Knowing who you're actually speaking to is a huge part of presenting. Be smart about jargon and technical terms. If the poster is for a discipline-specific conference, like if I'm going to the conference for the American Psychological Association, I can use certain terms that are really technical for my own field, and that's okay because I'm around a bunch of psychologists and they might know. If I'm in geosciences, I might use terms that are familiar with other geoscientists, but if it's a different kind of conference, I'm not going to want to use those terms because not everyone is going to understand what I'm talking about, and that's okay. So if it's for something like SICAD, cut back on the technical terms. Now reviewers, conference attendees, they may not know every single thing about your discipline. Again, that's perfectly fine. You're trying to communicate a bunch of information to them. And so you can't really assume that they're going to know every single thing past maybe an introductory level. So if I'm talking to people about psychology, I've kind of got to explain it in maybe a general psychology way. And sometimes that's a really difficult thing to do because you want to balance ease of communication with not coming across as condescending, right? don't speak to someone like they're in kindergarten, but don't speak to them like they're also in your area of specialty, okay? So again, the goal here is communication, not to make your audience feel stupid, right? Okay, so a presentation is more than just your poster. You want to dress professionally. This is all stuff that you've probably heard a million times before. Dress professionally. It can get kind of confusing. Sometimes I wear pink pants, and I might consider that professional, but probably not, right? For class, maybe that's like an appropriate thing, but maybe not for a professional conference. You want to speak clearly, consider the use of analogy, metaphor when appropriate, if you want to explain complicated concepts. Again, it's all about communication. You want people to understand what you're talking about. And then, of course, you want to practice. Practice like a 2 or 3 minute elevator talk. Does anybody know what an elevator talk is? Really quick. Okay, what's an elevator talk?
Oh, no.
You don't want to all right. So basically, a really, really short but clear explanation of your research. You should already have that just locked in. Like if I call you at 2 in the morning, what's your elevator talk? You should be able to say it, right? Half asleep, that should be something you can do. Okay, so practice, practice, and practice. If you don't practice, it's pretty clear that people are going to figure it out pretty easily, and it just makes you appear more professional. If you've got this thing down, you can kind of wing it a little bit, you can be flexible, but you have to know it first. And the most important thing to do, of course, is to have fun. When I take students to conferences, I try to make sure that they get the program early, they look at every single thing they might be interested in, and try to make the most of it. It's a great networking opportunity. Always you get to meet people in your own area. If you're ambitious and want to go to graduate school, it's a chance for you to meet people that you might work with. But it's also just a chance to kind of own something you might really enjoy doing. It's completely fine to enjoy doing research, to enjoy presenting, and let yourself have fun because you're going to be in a setting where everybody else is having fun doing the same thing that you're doing. So it's a really, really cool thing. So kind of let your guard down and just enjoy it, all right? Now that's really all I have. So I want to thank everybody for being very attentive and thank the library staff for having me and Hendratta here. And I'll open it up for any questions y'all might have.